That is a perfect segue, I think, now kind of tying in Brick+Work and George Smith is, so I touched upon this before, but and you also, I want to take a deeper dive. So essentially, just to set the table, what we've been noticing, because we're talking to developers too at the same time with brokers, because we're acting as a land use consultant or an attorney for hire on demand, cheaper than what you would actually pay the attorney, right? So that's kind of our value add for now. And by providing that extra advice about clarifications on a bunch of different things, what we've also seen our brokers use the reports for is really prospecting for off-market, would have never added that listing, multi-generational, multi-family office owners of a bunch of these properties that, it was never in the business plan to sell or joint venture, if that makes sense, right? Why would they, right? It's a great source of passive income. They could keep that in the family and it could just, generate income without paying too much tax. But what's been going on, obviously, post-COVID is that they're starting to review some of their portfolio, and not all of them, but of course, not everything in their portfolio is like, A grade, you know what I'm saying? Like just generating income and not worrisome. There are actually some properties that, dependent on the tenant mix, are a bit worrisome and concerning, right? On both ends, bank end and also on the lease end. So, they're now, and I've been on a few of these conference calls as, who's Brick+Work? Are you sure this report makes, right? So that's really my role in that conversation. But so, I've been privy to hearing this, and they're just like, look, we would have never done this, but we want a joint venture, like what you talked about, right? Where it's just, we'll put the land up, you guys build these at scale, let's get together. This feels like the highest, best use for this property at this time, I guess, right? Very, so let's talk more about that. And I know you said that was a great opportunity. What are some challenges you see there, or how does George Smith kind of can play a role in some of those deals too, where maybe they started off, but the developer now doesn't really have all the equity to make sure that it's built, even though there's land to play, right?
Yeah. So look, a lot of great points in what you're saying there. I think, from a prospecting standpoint, folks could use Brick+Works to, go to landowners and say, hey, or property owners and say, hey, like the highest and best use of your property isn't being achieved. Here's what it is. And here's the number that, I think I could get, or here's a partner who, you contribute the land and they'll fee develop. Or maybe they'll become your partner, but they'll manage all of the development. Or, hey, they'll manage it, and here's George Smith, and they'll help you put together the rest of the capital stack. The downtown LA deal that I mentioned that we just put into application is probably a good example of this. So the sponsor on the deal approached us, and his family actually owned this piece of property in downtown LA for like 50 years. I mean, they've owned it for a long time, and clearly it's appreciated a ton in that time frame. And they ended up getting pretty lucky because the land ended up being in an opportunity zone. It's south of Pico in downtown LA. And so when he first came to us last year, he said, look, I've got this piece of property. It's an heirloom, been in our family forever. We know we are not utilizing the highest and best use. We'd like to develop a 235 unit, mixed use apartment building on it. And we need help. And we need help in different facets of the stack. We need help arranging a co-GP. We don't really have the balance sheet to sign for such a large construction loan, which we talked about with $75 million in financing. That's a lot of pennies. So we need to have a big balance sheet to get the lenders comfortable, with a completion guarantee and that the sort of credit enhancement is there. So we brought in a good partner of ours that we've done a lot of business with to be the co-GP on that deal. The sponsor said, hey, we need a little help putting op zone equity groups together that might be interested. And so we helped out with that and made a bunch of introductions for the sponsor. ultimately on that deal, they had a pre-existing relationship that they brought in, but we were happy to help with that and support, and also make a bunch of new introductions for the sponsor.
Yeah.
And so now in their next deal, they really are going to know everybody within the OZ landscape, which I think is super helpful because, as I mentioned before, opportunity zone equity funds continue to be a fertile source for multifamily and for industrial development. And so, that equity source certainly isn't dead, contrary to some popular beliefs. And then they came to us and they said, look, we need some high leverage construction financing, which is unusual in the context of opportunity zone deals. Generally, opportunity zone funds want to put more equity in and not less.
Yeah.
And generally, like the traditional private equity funds, they want to limit a developer to probably utilizing, 60 or 65% loan to cost financing. In this case, we were able to exceed 70. And I think it's because the deal is so large. It was, $100 million deal, let's say. And so in that case, the opportunity zone fund said, look, I can earmark 20 or $25 million to this deal and no more. And so we need to utilize leverage to get there. But I think that's a fantastic example of something that, folks could think of Brick+Works for, because this sponsor knew that the highest investment wasn't, being achieved, and he had sort of a plan. And maybe it's a good example of how folks can kind of use us because the sponsor had that plan, but had never done a deal, on his own that was this large. He had a lot of experience doing big deals as part of a prior firm. But like this was his sort of first venture on his own. And that's normal for our profile. We get, guys that are sort of ex-institutional guys that spin out. We work with guys that are sort of just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We work with some family offices that are actually sponsors on their deals. And, so if they're entrepreneurial sponsors, we're pretty entrepreneurial guys. That mesh tends to work really well for us.
That is awesome. Yeah, that's I see that as a key component or a missing piece. Not dependent on the real estate broker that's kind of brokering that deal. They don't necessarily might not have that kind of game plan and those connections and make right. So you're actually a critical piece in those negotiations. So I think we'll talk on some synergies after this one. I already see them right now. So
one thing I'd add and throw out there is that we actually closed a $30 million land loan in the Tri-Cities that was a pre-development land loan for multifamily during the height of COVID.
Yeah.
Another land loan in Chinatown just last week. And that again was pre-development for multifamily. And we're working on a third in Koreatown right now. So to your point, to those folks that, might be looking to sell their land or might be looking, for pre-development, financing on land that's earmarked for multifamily use, that market isn't dead either. There's a lot of kind of belief out there that, the capital markets are completely, dead, and that we're, back in 2008 and this sort of correction that we're undergoing, the pandemic, it has been difficult for sure. And the capital markets aren't what they were in February, but they're not dead. And for multifamily and industrial plays, they're still very much alive and well, even to the point where you can get land financings done, which is usually the first area that dries up during a recession because land is illiquid and not cash flowing. So it's kind of interesting.
Absolutely.